Despite the severe economic decline caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, South Africa's venture capital sector attracted the biggest investment amount on record last year. Earlier, my colleague Nastasia Arendse spoke to Ketso Gordhan, CEO of the South Africa SME Fund.
So the SA SME Fund was set up a couple of years ago as a result of the CEO initiative. This was the time when South Africa was facing a ratings downgrade, and the private sector came together and wanted to take a few initiatives that would begin to, improve the situation in South Africa. And the fund was one of 2 or 3 initiatives by the CEOs. South Africa's top 50 corporates and the PIC together put up $100 million or 1.4 billion rands at that point to help grow the SME space. And what we've done with that money is we've acted as a fund of funds, so we give money to other fund managers, and we've done a bit of private equity, we've done a bit of debt financing for SMEs, but our major focus has been putting money into the venture capital industry, and we have provided funding to 7 venture capital funds in South Africa.
All right, awesome. I mean, let's talk about then the venture capital space. I mean, you would assume in a year like 2020, where they were still dealing with a pandemic, there'd probably be less, investments to put into. But surprisingly, it attracted the biggest investment amount on record in 2020. I mean, what do you make of that, and what do you think was driving that performance?
I think globally people understand venture capital. Venture capital has given us Facebook, it's given us Twitter, it's given us Instagram, it's given us all these unbelievable new initiatives based on innovation. So it's been a long time coming in South Africa. We've been lagging our peers on the rest of the continent. So Nigeria, Kenya, and Egypt have a bigger venture capital industry than we do. So 2020 was in fact the continuation of a momentum that started a few years ago. And despite COVID, because of the nature of venture capital investing, we were able to continue. A lot more money went into venture capital deals last year than the previous year. So 1.4 billion into about 120 venture capital deals last year in South Africa, which is very impressive, but still a long way to go.
From your perspective, what do you make of South Africa's entrepreneurs from a scalable innovation point of view? I mean, what are some of the stuff you're seeing out there that's making you smile?
I mean, I think in Africa and South Africa included, unlike in other venture capital markets, here entrepreneurs are trying to solve real problems. So a lot of the venture capital investments are either in Fintech to try and make, financial services more inclusive, health tech to try and improve, health services, ed tech to try and make, online learning and other interventions more viable. So entrepreneurs are much more impact focused, trying to solve real problems that confront South Africans. And because South Africa is such an interesting market, if your product works here, the chances that it will work in other emerging or even developed markets is pretty high. And I'll give you one example. So there's a company called Aerobotics, and they were using drones to fly over agriculture sites, and they would be able to tell the farmer what the state of the farm was, where the problems were, and what was required to fix it. And it started in South Africa, but today it's operating in probably 10 or 12 markets across the world. And it's valued at more than R1 billion today. So that's a good example of a South African startup solving a South African problem that was able to expand, way beyond our borders.
In which sectors are you seeing investments being made?
The winner in terms of the majority of the money remains Fintech, and it's driven partly by real problems where there's not enough financial inclusion, but it's also driven by the fact that not much capital is required to start these businesses. So many of these startups, have 1 or 2 or 3 million rands to get off the ground, and once they've proven the concept and they've gotten the first few customers, it then expands from there, to a much bigger scale. And the success story in this space that everybody's been talking about in the last few weeks is a company called Yoko. It started off as a card payment device addressing SMEs that can't afford to get an FNB or an ABSA card machine. and they've just raised over R1 billion. The company is now worth, a couple of $100 million. And they've got customers mainly in South Africa, but with this new money, they plan to expand beyond the South African borders. So there are many success stories in fintech. Health tech, education tech, and agricultural tech are probably the next three biggest sectors that have been receiving attention and investment.
In terms of the ecosystem to support entrepreneurs, what more can be done in order for us to see some of these successes, such as the Yokos of the future? What can we do?
I think there's a number of things we can do. The one that's really important is to support more accelerators and incubators that have quality people that can help young entrepreneurs solve the initial problems that they have. Seed capital, which is typically a small amount of money, coming typically from family and friends, but we need a lot more seed investments to be made in South Africa, because the success rate with startups is typically 1 in 10. So you need to do 10 seed deals to get one successful business out of that. And maybe out of the 10 successful ones, maybe 2 or 3 will scale and become a meaningful size. So, it is a difficult industry, and it requires a lot more seed capital. And probably the biggest problem we have is private equity is a well-established asset class in South Africa. So pension funds and insurance companies will put money into private equity funds. We've not had the breakthrough where pension funds and insurance companies put money into venture capital. So when we get institutional investors to start putting money into venture capital, that will be a significant signal that the industry is about to take off.
On that note then, when we speak of gender diversity in the industry, are you seeing a lot more women playing in the venture capital private equity space?
It's definitely improving, and probably about 20%, 30% of all venture capital funds now have a significant participation of women in the top management structures. And because of the low barriers to entry into the venture capital space, I think, and the focus on diversity from a geographic, gender, and sort of sector point of view, I think the probability of success for gender representativity is pretty high. But that doesn't mean we should take our eye off the ball and focus on making sure that it happens in a much more organized way.
All right, before I let you go, where are your optimism levels sitting when it comes to South Africa's economy, between 0 to 10, 10 being the most super optimistic person would probably find?
I think it's a 10 for the venture capital space and lower for everything else. And as we see in the rest of the world, innovation and technological development drives economic growth. South Africa sits in a very strong position as far as our ability to generate IP, whether it's from our universities, from our corporates, from individuals, from our science councils. And we've got to back those ideas and help commercialize them. And I think we have a bright future with new industries and new technologies.